Let's read the Bible together. We're going to read Philippians chapter 1, verses 19 through 21. Philippians chapter 1, verses 19 through 21. I want to invite you to read this verse, 3 verses responsively. So I'm going to read one verse, and then I want to invite you to read verse 20. Then we're going to read verse 21 with one voice. For I know that through your prayers and God's provisions of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage so that now, as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. Let's read this verse together. For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. Amen. Can we turn around to our brothers and sisters one more time? And this time, let's say, peace be with you. Peace be with you. As I have shared during the announcements, we had about 30-something people went to Turkey Run State Park yesterday. Then we were able to have eat hot dogs and burgers and some chips, and then we hiked for about 28 miles, and were able to eat ramen. And as one of our members said, ramen tastes the best when you are eating at the campsite, not in your own living room. Or I added, swimming pool is also a good place to eat ramen too. So I visited the Turkey Run to check the trail on Thursday. When I did it by myself, of course, it was not that packed. It took less than an hour. So I thought, well, we're having some kids, so it's going to take about 1.5 hours. But I was so wrong. I overestimated our students, and there were more people. So it took about 2 hours. During the time, one of the kids, when I say kids, they were elementary kids, he came to me and said, Pastor Paul, it hurts. My legs hurt. And do you know what I told him? Told them, hey, you think your legs hurt? You think your legs hurt because you think your legs hurt. If you think my legs are fresh, your legs will feel fresh. And this is what she told me. You are a liar. Well, for some of you who do not know me well or don't know me yet, I do CrossFit. CrossFit is a very interesting training. Anyone can do it easily. It's not really hard or difficult. You just learn how to deal with your pain. Every time, what I hate the most is when I feel like my lungs are burning or my legs are on fire. Sometimes after you finish the workout, you cannot move at all because your legs are shaking, your legs hurt so much. And this is what one of my coaches often tell me whenever I lay on the ground and it hurts, and he comes to me and says, just tell your body it's going to be okay. Then it's going to be okay. Well, then I shared this experience with some of my friends who are not into exercise at all, and then they asked me, why are you putting yourself in a painful mode? It hurts you. Then I said, well, it's painful, it's hard and difficult, but you feel some kind of joy that you can never feel in your daily life. It's so addictive. If you are not into football, when I say football, I mean the true football from England. I'm not talking about the football that you're throwing the ball and when people run. I'm talking about the football that you're kicking the ball, past the ball, which is called soccer in the United States. There's one of my favorite players. Maybe you have heard his name before, David Beckham. He was one of the best players in human history. Some of you may disagree with me if you know him. He's a great pastor. He's a hard worker. He was one of the celeb when he was playing. He married to this beautiful singer, one of the Spicy Girls member, Victoria Beckham. And then I really liked him since he was playing. I was really young when he was playing, really, but I still knew him and I loved him because he was a good-looking guy. He was running really hard. He was a hard worker. His tackles were really challenging too. I really like his hard way of playing. But anyway, Netflix released a document about it. If you are looking for a great document, I highly recommend it. It only has 4 episodes in it. But the reason why I'm sharing this is if you're watching the episodes, there's one thing that he never stops doing. Do you know what it is? Cleaning his kitchen. Cleaning his kitchen. He's interviewing and he's moving like the angle of his chair just a little bit. I'm like, maybe 1 degree, 2 degrees. And then I'm like, holy crap, what's wrong with him? So I shared this experience with some guys that I play soccer with on Thursday. They said some of them were used to play soccer, football in their college time, and then they were saying, oh yeah, that's a lot of professional athletes are doing that. Then I asked them, why are they doing it? Because like they want to keep their lives in routines. Some of you may follow the routines, but if you really think about it as a third person's point of view, just moving 1 degree, like 1 inch of chair, to put that in your routine. Or you clean the tables over and over because you see some flaws from the tables. Or you have to fold your clothes in certain ways, put your things in the certain ways. It looks painful, and you don't understand why they're doing it, but they sacrifice their time, sacrifice their efforts so that they can stay in those routines. And I have shared this with you several times, but I also have certain routines in my personal level. When I'm really anxious, like if I mess up with the way I'm putting my clothes on, what I end up doing is I'm taking another shower because I'm like, something bad is going to happen to me. That's kind of my things in me. But I do that because so that I can feel better. So the reason I'm saying this is because I want to think about, and I want to challenge you to think about some hardships today and with some different approaches. Whenever we hear the word hardships, it's something that everyone wants to avoid. The reason why we want to avoid the hardship is because it itself is painful. And then usually hardship does not come to us by itself. Usually whenever we are in a hard or difficult time in our life, it usually comes with some feelings of loneliness or feelings of isolations or some feelings of other negative things together as a package. But if you want to apply what I shared earlier about professional athletes or staying in the routines, and you sacrifice your time and efforts to stay in the routine, and with this understanding of hardships, some people put themselves in this very strict and hard lifestyle so that they can feel better with what they're doing it. So what I want us to think about today is that hardship is not always something negative or something bad. Because if you really read, because according to the passage we just read, Paul is even saying in verse 21, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. So in order for us to understand where this idea is coming from, I gave you a really brief summary of his life last week, but let me just give you one more really brief summary about Paul for those who were not here last week. Paul was born as a Roman citizen. During the time, born as a Roman citizen is a little different than born as a U.S. citizen right now. Because during the time, born as a Roman citizen, and then he was not born in the city of Rome, meant that his parents has some type of political or some type of economic status in the society. So Paul was born from a pretty okay, or like at least higher than the middle class family. And if you read the other letters, Paul was a student from a teacher whose name was Gamaliel. Gamaliel was one of the best teacher of the law during that time. So he was not just born from a really upper level class, but he was also educated from a great professor during that time. And also, if you read the book of Acts and how this person, his name was Saul, his name is Saul in Hebrew and Paul in Greek. When he was called as a Saul, he was getting his fame from the Jewish people by persecuting Christians during the time. So if you combine all this, he was from an upper level class, and he was pretty well educated, and he was getting his name known around his people during this time. But what happened to him is he received some type of permissions from the religious leaders, and he was traveling to a place called Damascus, and on his way, he saw a bright light, and then from the bright light, he saw a vision. He talked to Jesus face to face. What happens to him after that is he turns into blind. He becomes blind, and then after he meeting Jesus, he like, oh, I've been living a wrong life. Let me change the path of my life. So he decided to dedicate his life to Jesus Christ, and then he no longer lives as a Jewish popular person anymore. Now he lives as a Christian missionary who is spending his whole time in life to spread the gospel. But what happens to him is from this transition from Jewish to Judaism to Christianity, what happens to him is because of his conversion, he begins to go through the life that is filled with hardships and sufferings. People did not like him. Jewish leaders did not like him. Not only Jewish leaders, but also Roman governors did not really like him. So he began to be imprisoned during this time. And then if you don't know about the ancient Greek or ancient Roman prison, they did not have any human rights if you are imprisoned. They did not sentence you with certain period of time. They just put you into prison and you don't know when you're going to get out. They did not feed you well. The hygiene was really poor in the prison setting. So the death rate from the prison was extremely high. So even some historians even says, if you are in prison during this time as a civilian, that means you just received a death sentence, because most people came out dead from the prison. So for Paul, the way that God was leading his life to was the path that was filled with pain, filled with abandonment from people, filled with sufferings and hardships. And in the prison where he was suffering, he says, "For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain." Because he learned something really important, that he thought, for me, if I gain this thing, I can even sacrifice my life for this. He discovered something that has been hidden from us, and he discovered and then experienced the great things from his sufferings. That is what I want us to think about today. The first thing is this. Hardships, that what Paul is telling us is hardships are God's way of telling us to wait or gain. I want to introduce you some biblical characters that we can find from the book, the Bible. I'm not going to go into the really details of their lives, but let me just give you their brief summaries of their life. The first name I want to introduce is Joseph. He was a favorite son of his dad, Jacob. He had 10 older brothers and one younger brother, but because of this favoritism, his brothers did not like him, so they sold him as a slave to Egypt. And then he became a slave of a house of Potiphar, who was a guard of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt during that time. But Potiphar's wife tried to seduce Joseph, but he said, no. And then Potiphar's wife mad at him, so she put some wrong crimes on him. So now Joseph became a prisoner. But somehow he deciphered the dreams of cupbearer of the Egyptian king Pharaoh, so he became a prime minister of Egypt. So we only focus on the fact that he became a prime minister after all these sufferings, but if you really think in the shoes of Joseph, think about it. Think about when you were being abandoned by your brothers. You became a slave because your brothers betrayed you. Your brothers sold you to Egypt as a slave? What would you think at the moment? And another person I want us to think about is Moses. He, first 40 years, he was an Egyptian princess, and then he was educated with great Egyptian ways, and he had most power, and he was super intelligent person during that time. But he knew that he was not from Egypt. He was adopted by the Egyptian princess. So he knew he had to live his life for his people. So he tried to save his people, but what happened is he accidentally killed an Egyptian soldier. That accident or mistake, however you want to call it, he ran away. Then he lived his next 40 years in the wilderness. And then after those 40 years, he became a leader of Israel. And then we have David. He was the best in Israel history. He was the youngest son, and then he was also a shepherd. But what happened is the first king Saul betrayed God, so God said, I'm not going to let you be the king anymore. So God finds David and told Samuel the prophet to anoint David. But what happened is, because now David is anointed, and the king Saul really wanted to kill him because King Saul got really jealous of David. So David had to run away from the king over 10 years. There's one more person, Paul. As I said, he was a Roman citizen, student of Gamaliel, but he became the blind. He became the blind, now he became the missionary. Now he became the missionary, but now he becomes a prisoner. But that was not it. He became a martyr for God. So what I really want you to pay attention from all these summaries of these 4 types of people is this. Before God used them, all of them went through a specific phase in their lifetime. Before Joseph became a prime minister of Egypt, he had to suffer as a slave and a prisoner for about 13 years in his life. What about Moses? Before he was able to deliver his people out of Egypt and became one of the greatest leaders in Israel history, he had to live as a loser and a failure for 40 years in the wilderness. What about David? Before he became a king and then become the greatest king in Israel history, what happened to him? He had to run away from the king Saul to survive over 10 years. What about Paul? Before he write the majority of the New Testament, he had to go blind, that he had to suffer in the prison, and that he had to die for the name of Christ. If you've been here last couple of weeks, maybe you will remember one of the narratives or genre that I explained to you from the Old Testament. There are several genres we can see from the Bible. One of the genres we can find from the Bible is how God is calling people, right? God calls the people, and then they say, no, and then God reaffirms them, reassures them with some types of miracles, and then through the miracles, and they accept their calling. And then one of the reasons we were able to define this as a genre, because the way that God is calling people have a lot of commonalities there, right? There's a way that God is working. So God is not the one who is working out of nowhere. He has a pattern, and then He has a ways of working that has implemented in the Bible that He wants us to learn and know so that we can discern when God's time is there. One of the ways that God is working is this. Before He uses you and me, God is going to lead us a time of hardships and sufferings so that we can be disciplined and we can be trained. Let's see it in this way. What if Joseph did not go through any of these hardships as a slave and as a prisoner? What if he just lived his life as a favorite kid of his dad? What if Moses was able to use his power and knowledge to deliver Israel people out of Egypt with his own might and with his own ability? What would happen if David did not go through any sufferings and time of running away from Saul and just become a king of Israel? What would happen to Paul if we did not go through any times of blindness or any times in prison, and whenever he's preaching, people return to Christ, then whenever he prays, people getting healed? What if Paul lived his life without any types of sufferings and hardship? What would happen to them? The answer is pretty easy. Even though it does not matter how much they have achieved, it does not matter how many people have returned to God. If they did not go through any types of hardships in their life, what's going to remain in them is this: they will think and say, it was all my own achievement. That's what hardships is teaching us. When everything is so happy, when we are full of God's grace, whenever we are feeling so filled up with God's presence, we can do anything so easily. If I'm asking you, can you serve in this area of ministry? We're going to say yes to that so easily because everything is happy in our lives. But what's going to happen when we are feeling spiritually thirsty, when we're struggling, when we have struggles in our lives, or when things are not going well, when it feels like God is not listening to our prayers? So what I'm saying is that when we are going through the time of sufferings in our lives, can we still obey God as we are doing in the time of happiness? The answer is no. When we are going through the time of sufferings, we are always filled up with question, and the question can be, if you categorize them, we only can have one category. The answer is this: where's God? Where's God in our lives? And then as we are asking the same question, where is God in our lives? What is God doing in this situation? There is one realization that comes to us, that is, wow, I thought I was pretty strong in my spiritual level. I've been grown up. I've been mature in spiritual level. But when the hardship is hitting our lives really hard, then we realize we are nothing. There's nothing we can do in this situation. Then what do? Then we can finally kneel down before God. That is what the hardships are teaching us. God sometimes make us stop using the hardships so that we can realize that this is not what we are doing with our own minds, but we cannot do anything without God. There is a message that we have to learn from the hardships and difficulties and painful moments in our lives. So, if you are going through any times of sufferings or any types of struggles in your life, I hope we can be grateful for that. Because God is reminding us that we cannot do anything without Him. And the second thing I want us to keep in mind as we are going through some time of suffering is trials transform our perspective from Chronos to Kairos. So, what today's passage is telling us is from. So let me explain what Chronos and Kairos is first. If you are familiar with this, it could be a good review for you. If you're not familiar with this, it's always interesting to learn something in ancient Greek. Chronos is where the word chronicles are from. Chronos meaning the sequential time we all know. It's like governing our daily life. So what time is it? Like 12 to 18, 12, it's going to be 12, 19, a minute later, that's Chronos. Chronos is like from the beginning to the end. But Kairos, there's another word that is often translated time in Greek word, which is Kairos. Kairos is special moments with opportunities. So more specifically, how theologians are using this word, or how the Bible is using this word, is divine moments in time. The opportune scenarios, the God-appointed instances. So these two words are the same. If you translate it in English or Korean or however language, it's going to be time. But when we are saying, when there's a chronos time, that means just like time that is flowing, that is moving. But kairos is a different time. Kairos is a time that has purpose in it. Kairos is a time that has like special opportunities in it. Kairos has something special in it because that is the time that God has appointed for us. So if you read Philippians chapter 1, verses 19, I don't think I have it in the slide. Let me read chapter 1, verse 19 for you. This is what Paul says. For I know that through your prayers and God's provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, what has happened to me, he says, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. So let me read verse 19 again. For I know, Paul says, I know through your prayers, Philippian Christians, through your prayers and God's provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, what I know this, through all of them, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. What has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. We have to be reminded where Paul was writing this letter from and what Paul was going through when he was writing this letter to the Christians in Philippi. He was writing this letter in the prison, and then there was no sign of him getting out of his prison during this time. He did not get any favors from the judges during this time. He was not getting there was nothing positive happening in his life. No one was telling him, you're going to get out of jail pretty soon. No one was telling him. He was still in jail, but he is still saying, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. This is what Paul is saying. Hey, Philippian Christians, are you worried about me? Are you worried about me? Are you worried about me because I'm in the prison? You know how the prison situations are going? Are you worried about me because I might die in the prison? But guess what? Even though there's no signs of turning all these things into positive, I still have a faith in me, because even though there's nothing happening to me right now, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance in not Chronos, in Kairos, in God's time. So what Paul really believed and what Paul knew about his situation was this. Even though the reality that he's facing with seems impossible for him to get over and overcome, but as Eric prayed after praise, he knew for God nothing was impossible. But here's the thing, we also say nothing is impossible, but we always add a condition to it. Nothing is impossible, God, but you have to make nothing is impossible when I want it to happen. But what Paul knew is, no. Even though it seems like he's not doing anything now, I have faith in me. When God's time comes, He's going to make my situation better. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 7 through 8 says something really interesting to us. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as His children. For what children are not disciplined by their father? If you are not disciplined and everyone undergoes discipline, then you are not legitimate, not true sons, daughters at all. So we do not want to have any hardships and sufferings in our lives. But what the author of Hebrews is saying, if everything is going well for you, you have to be concerned about your relationships with God. If you're not going through any hardships in your life, if you're not going through any disciplines in your life, do you really think you have a relationship with God? The parents will discipline their kids. God is disciplining us through hardships because we are His children. We don't understand why we are going through disciplines now. Children, I couldn't understand why parents are disciplining me that way. I couldn't understand why my mom and dad was nagging me so much because I don't clean my room. I couldn't understand why when I was younger, my parents do not touch the really hot food. But now I know it's going to burn my hands. When we are under the disciplines, we don't know the purpose of it. But parents are still disciplining their kids, their children, because they know it's going to be good for them. If the children can overcome and endure and complete those disciplines, we all know they're going to learn something from it, they're going to grow from it, and they will become more mature because they have completed those disciplines. But why do we often forget this very simple factor in our relationships with God? Why are we always choose to complain to God? Why do we always give distrust to God whenever we are facing with hardships and sufferings in our lives? Why can't we be grateful for? Why do we always struggle in Chronos not believing that when Kairos comes, when God's time comes, we will understand why we are going through this time? So I really want to challenge you to think in this way today. Sufferings can turn into our blessings because God never forsakes us because we are His children. And sufferings will turn into our blessings because our trials signify our identity as God's beloved. If you are under the sufferings, hardships, pains, let's rejoice. Let's try to rejoice because God is telling us and teaching us something through those sufferings and painful moments. As we remember this, I want to share 2 questions with you to challenge all of us. Reflecting on the lives of Joseph, Moses, David, and Paul, in what ways have your own hardships or adversity served as transformative experiences, shifting our reliance from your own abilities to a deeper trust in God's plan? How can you maintain this perspective in future challenges? Let's think about that. And another thing I want to think about and really challenge you is this question. Considering the concept of Chronos and Kairos, can you recall a moment in your life when what seemed like a negative event or a period in your Chronos unfolded into an opportunity for growth or blessing, which is Kairos? How might this understanding change the way you approach the current or future adversities? Testimonies have power because it encourages other people by sharing our experiences. So remembering what God has done in our lives is very important for us because those things will encourage us to stay with God in time of our future difficulties. So if you have any, I want to challenge you to write it down or record it with your voice so that you can be reminded how God has worked for you. Because this faithful God is going to work in the same way in the future. He will deliver you out of your sufferings and He will discipline you and teach you through those sufferings. Let's pray. Father God, we thank you so much for being our God and being a good God, Lord. We oftentimes think a good God has to only give us good times, Lord. But Lord, help us to remember that. Good parents always and know when and how to discipline their kids. And you are our good parents. You know how to discipline us. You know what we need. You know what is going to make us grow. And you know what is going to make us happy. Lord, help us know that you have all the full control of our lives. Help us to be able to submit ourselves to you. Help us so that we can even rejoice even in the time of sufferings and pain, Lord. Help us know that you are telling us something through the sufferings, and help us to be able to discern and open our ears and hearts so that we can hear what you're telling us through the time of sufferings and struggles, Lord. Lord, please be with us as we go out and live our life, and help us to be reminded that you are always there with us. You are always hearing our prayers, Lord, so that we can seek your presence in our every moment. We love you, Lord. In your name we pray.